Hey everybody, it's Rob here at etrailer.com, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Roadmaster Rear Anti-Sway Bar on our 2018 Winnebago Sunstar LX Motorhome. Whether you're new to driving a motorhome or you've been doing it for a while, you'll realize real quickly that it's not very comfortable or practical if you haven't driven something this large before. There's a lot of area for the wind to catch, which just means that the wind is going to start pushing us around on the highway. And that all equates to us moving around in the seat, fighting the steering wheel, trying to keep our motorhome tracking straight, not to mention all the passengers and gear we have back here that's getting tossed around. So overall, it can be a little nerve-wracking, it can be a little stressful, and we can be exhausted by the time where we're getting to where we're going. But that's where all those suspension upgrades really help. The anti-sway bars are really going to help prevent that side-to-side body sway and rolling feeling that we get, and really help stiffen everything up. So I'm going to take my motorhome out on the test course just so we can get a nice baseline run. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come up to our bumps course. Now that's going to tell us a little bit, mainly on the alternating bumps, so we can get that side-to-side action, kind of like if we're hitting a pothole on the road or if there's a bump in the road. That'll show us that kind of uneven action and that swaying action we get when we go side to side. I'm going to go about 5 miles an hour just so we have a baseline, something to compare it to. And right here on these alternating bumps, it's not that bad, but it definitely is kind of rocking everything, especially you can hear it in the back. I can hear things kind of moving around back there. And even up front here, as the back end goes over, I'm having to make sure that the motorhome's pointed where I want it to go. Just have to keep readjusting the steering wheel, not mentioning having to make sure I keep adjusting in the seat to make sure I feel like I have enough control. Now we're going to come up to our slalom course, just go in and out of a few turns and see if we can see how much body roll our motorhome has. Now I'm going to be going about 10 miles an hour, just again to get a baseline run to something to compare it to. And right away, the first thing I notice is that the motorhome definitely wants to lean really hard and then turn. It's not so much that it's not going where I want it to, but it's very slow to respond, and since it's so soft, it feels like I need to slow down a little bit so that the motorhome can catch up to what I want it to do. And honestly, I am in a parking lot, but I don't know if I'd really want to drive this around some backcountry roads or even just for a long period of time. Again, everything just kind of feels very soft, almost like we're driving a boat rather than a vehicle. Feels like kind of like we're floating down the road. And even just through the parking lot, you can see how much we keep swaying back and forth, even just through the little cracks and bumps in the road. So here's what our Roadmaster Sway Bar looks like once we have it installed. A few things I do want to mention is that this is specifically designed for motorhomes that are between 16K and 18K for the gross vehicle weight rating. You want to make sure that you have the correct sway bar, and then you can use eTrailer's Fit Guide to see which one actually fits your motorhome specifically. Now, our Roadmaster Rear Sway Bar is actually meant to help supplement the factory sway bar. This doesn't replace it, it just helps support it and give us that much more stability back here. Because let's face it, whenever we're driving down the road, the back end especially starts to feel a little bit top heavy, you start to get pushed around, and that's because of all the weight back here. But our sway bar is going to attach directly to the rear axle and the frame. That way you can use the weight of the axle to transfer that weight and try to keep everything nice and level rather than really dramatically shifting all that weight to one side, which causes that body roll. Now the bar is going to be 1.5 inches in diameter, so you can see it's pretty thick, which is going to do a lot for us. It's going to give us that much strength and stability, and it is made out of a 4140 chrome moly steel, so there's not a whole lot of deflection to it, which is what you want in a sway bar. You don't want it to be able to bend and flex a whole lot, because then it's not really giving us the support we need. At the same time though, we do need a little bit of rotation and a little bit of flex, and that's why Roadmaster has included these polyurethane bushings. They definitely hold up a lot better than rubber. They're going to withstand most of the chemicals that we'll see, especially on the road, like road salt, gasoline, oil. It's not going to break those down. But the other nice thing is that they are lubricated, the ones that are on the axle, and that will allow the bar to flex and rotate just enough so we can compensate for the weight that's being put on it, and we don't have to worry about any kind of squeaking, because that lubricant is definitely going to cut down on all that noise. Now, a rear sway bar definitely helps out in the back end. But if you're having a lot of drivability issues with your motorhome, you may want to look into a front sway bar as well, because the more stability we can get from the front to the back, the better we can have, and the more we can enjoy our motorhome and actually relax. Now, I think one of the best things about our rear sway bar here is the fact that you can do it at home. You don't need a lift to lift the motorhome off the ground, and there's no drilling involved at all. Everything's just going to bolt up to existing holes, and they do provide you with all the hardware, bushings, lubricant, and everything else you need to get installed. Now we can go back on our test course, and again, we'll be going over the speed bumps, about 5 miles an hour. And again, we're really going to be watching for that side-to-side action on the alternating bumps. After going over a few, it does seem a little bit better, but that's not too much of where that body roll was coming from. It was more about in and out of the turns, but it does seem a little bit more stable. It doesn't seem to be swaying as much. It's definitely a lot more manageable. I can relax a little bit, and I don't feel like I have to have such a grip on the steering wheel and be as nervous as I'm going through the parking lot here. Now the real test is when we come to the slalom course, and we're going in and out of the turns, because that was really where we were getting a lot of that rolling feeling and that soft feeling. So hopefully the motorhome will act a little bit better, drive a little bit better for us this time. And again, I'm going to be going about 10 miles an hour just so I can have a nice baseline run to compare it to. And to be honest with you, I can tell a pretty big difference right away. Still feels a little bit soft. It's not a sports car, but it feels a lot better. It does react a little bit quicker, and instead of that really harsh leaning, it does lean a little bit, but something this big is kind of expected to be a little bit soft. Definitely handles a lot better than it did before, and it does want to react quicker. Again, doesn't completely take it away, but this is definitely a lot nicer. It's a lot more manageable, and I feel more in control, and I can just genuinely relax a little bit. And even just going through the parking lot, some of the unevenness that we have here, it was swaying back and forth, almost swinging. And now, don't get me wrong, the bumps are still there, the unevenness is still there, but it just seems to get over it, and we're not swaying like we're on a boat, continuing as we go down the road. To begin our installation, we want to park our motorhome on a flat level surface, and we need a little bit of room underneath so we can access a few bolts. So you want to use your leveling jacks to lift up the back end, but you want to leave the tires on the ground still. We just want a little bit of stretch and flex in the suspension. Then we can move in right behind the tire inside the wheel well here. So if we look against the frame, on the bottom of the frame here, we're going to have two bolts. We need to remove those. Now, there is keeper nuts on the back, but that's the nice thing is we don't have to have a wrench to hold it because there's little tabs on there to kind of work in our advantage. But you want to grab a 21mm socket and extension so you can reach, make it a little bit easier to get in there, and something to drive those, and then we can pull them out. Now once you get the bolts out of the frame, you want to make sure you grab the nuts. They got little keepers on them. Most likely they'll fall on the frame if not on the ground, but you want to make sure you grab all the hardware. Next we can grab our frame bracket. It's going to be kind of an L shape. There's going to be 2 holes in it. The 2 holes are going to line up with the side of the frame where the bolts we just removed, and then the 2 tabs you want to be facing towards the bottom. Then we can just take the factory bolts that we removed, we'll go through the frame, through the bracket, make sure we get both of them in place. They'll kind of hold the bracket loosely there. And then once we have those in place, we want to reach to the back of the frame and put the keeper nut in place. Now for now, we just want to get them on there so that they're hand tight. We can come back and we can snug everything down. And whenever you tighten up the nuts again, it's nice because we don't have to get a wrench. So once we get them started, we can just use an impact driver to snug them down the rest of the way. Now we're going to have 2 more bolts in the exact same location on the other side of the frame, as well as another bracket. So we want to loosen those up and put the other bracket in on the other side of the frame. Then we want to move to the rear of the back axle. We're going to find our shocks, and there's going to be a bolt holding in the lower shock section here. We need to remove that bolt so we can actually get behind the shock and access the mount. So we can grab a 1 1/8 inch socket. And you're probably going to want to use a wrench as well to hold the nut on the other side. And we're going to go ahead and loosen it up and pull those bolts and nuts out. And whenever you do loosen up the hardware, you want to make sure you hold on to it all. Make sure you have all the washers, nuts, and bolts. We'll pull the bolts out, and then for now, we just kind of want to grab the shock and move it to either side so we can get access to that mount behind it. Now you do want to move over to the other side and loosen up the lower shock as well, so we'll go over there and do the same thing. Now that we can see the shock mount, you'll notice that there's going to be 2 holes in there. We're going to use those to get some hardware in place. So we're going to grab one of the 3/8 bolts out of our kit and a flat washer. This is going to go through the very top hole. Just want to get the bolt halfway started in there, make sure it's lined up, and then it's a little bit of a tight fit, so you may need to maybe get a hammer and tap it in there, or if you can, just turn it so that it'll thread in. We have less of a chance of damaging the threads, but you want it to seat all the way in there. Now on the lower hole, since our shock is going to be in the way, we want to use one of these button head screws. Now, what I've noticed is a few times is we do want to put a washer in place, but it'll have a notch on it, and that's so that the shock doesn't interfere. But what I've noticed is that sometimes, depending on the shocks and the motorhome, the bolt sticks up just enough to where you can't get the shock bolt in, so you may have to remove the washer. Now we're going to go ahead and put it in place, and we'll double check to make sure that the shock fits back in there and we can get the bolt through. And again, it's a little bit of a tight fit, so we just want to get it in place. And if you're having a hard time pressing it in, you want to grab a 7/32 Allen bit, and then we can thread it in. And again, just to make sure we can get our shock back in place, we'll slide it back in and test fit our bolt and make sure it can go back in place. So it is just a little bit too big, so we can't get that bolt in. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the washer out. Pull the bolt out. Remove the washer. Put the bolt back and retest it again. We know we can get our bolt back in, so at least on this side we're not going to put that inner washer in because again we can't get our shock back in. You want to make sure you again pull your shock back out. We want to leave these bolts exposed, and then we're going to go ahead and get the hardware in place on the other shock mount. Now that the motorhome's prepped, we need to prep our sway bar. So we want to grab the clamps, the bushings, lubricant, and the bar out of our kit. Now these split bushings, they are split bushings, so we can open them up and slide them onto the bar really easily. But we want to make sure that we put a good amount of lubricant inside the bushing. So I definitely recommend wearing gloves. It gets very messy very quickly, but we're going to take that lubricant. You just want to coat the entire inside of that bushing. And this is going to help a lot when it comes to squeaking and annoying noises, because if any water does get inside the bushing, it'll start making tons of noise. So the grease will definitely help out. You want to open it up, slide it onto the bar right about this end piece here. And then we'll take our saddle clamp, just slide it right over the edge. We're going to do that for the other bushing on the other side of our bar. So we're going to lift our sway bar up. We're going to make sure that the round opening is going towards the back of the axle. And we want to slide the clamps over the mount. And then on the bottom here, we want to get another one of those cut flat washers in place so it'll clear the mount. And then we're going to take a 3/8 lock nut. You want to get at least one in on each side, that way the sway bar will hold itself up and we'll get the rest of the hardware in. The top hole is just going to get a regular flat washer, but each one of them is going to get one of those locking nuts. So you just want to get them loosely started and again get the rest of the hardware in. Now once you have all the hardware in place, you definitely want to tighten it up and torque it down before you put the shocks back, because it's going to make it extremely hard to even get access to it. So I'm going to use a 9/16 wrench to hold the nut and a 7/32 to tighten up that button head screw. And then for the regular hex bolts, we're going to use a 9/16 socket and again a 9/16 wrench to hold the nut on the back side. And we'll move over to the other side and tighten those up as well. So at this point, you want to go ahead and put your shocks back in place, torque everything down if you haven't already done that. But then you want to lower your motorhome enough so that those tabs we put on the frame, those tabs that come down, clear the leaf spring, and we can come from the outside and put a bolt all the way through. So we want to grab our shackle clamp. One end's going to have a bushing on it. That'll slide into the frame bracket. You want to line everything up so that the holes line up. Then we're going to take the large bolt, and again, coming from the outside, going to pass the bolt through the bracket, through the bushing, until it goes all the way through to the inside of that bracket on the inside of the frame. Now it is going to come with a lock nut, so I'm going to loosely put that in place. We'll swing the sway bar up until those bushings match up and line up with the tabs that are coming off that bracket. Now you may need to swing the bracket a little bit, swing the sway bar, but then again we'll take that same size bolt and from the outside go through all of it and then real loosely put another hex nut in place. Now we want to go to the other side, get our and we'll move to the other side and we're going to repeat that process, connecting our sway bar to the end link here. Now once your sway bar is loosely in place, we can come back, we can tighten up the nuts that are holding the end links and brackets on. You can grab a 24mm or a 15/16 inch socket and wrench, and we're going to snug them up. Now one thing I do want to mention, when you're tightening these up, we don't want to tighten them up so much that they crush those bushings. We want to just tighten them up to where they make contact, and then we're going to stop. And we're going to go back and repeat that for all of our remaining hardware. But now that our sway bar is in place, we can go ahead and lower it down, take it for a quick test drive, and see how much of an improvement it made. Overall, I definitely think our Roadmaster Rear Anti-Sway Bar helped out. It really just depends on what kind of symptoms you're having with your motorhome, and especially if it's in the back and you're getting a lot of that side-to-side action, I definitely think it makes some improvement there. But that'll finish up your look at the Roadmaster Rear Anti-Sway Bar on our Winnebago Sunstar LX Motorhome.